The JMF Advisors Show is a podcast for business owners, C-suite executives, and entrepreneurs who are looking to build, grow, or even exit a business.
We bring in some of our best financial advisors to interview experts on business best practices, hot topics, and sprinkle in some tax and accounting help.
If you're a business owner, startup founder, CFO, or just starting your side hustle, this podcast is for you.
All right, welcome to another episode of the JMF Advisor Show. I'm Kim Smith, and I'm a shareholder at JMF in our tax department, and I'm here with Christy. And Christy, why don't you introduce yourself? And
Good afternoon. I'm Christy Moore, and I too am a shareholder at JMF, and I work in tax department and help co-lead our client accounting services department.
And you know, we've never done a podcast before.
We have not.
We were on the flagship committee to kind of get these things going, and I think Bobby said that we've probably done some of the most, but we've never done one together.
That's
so
right.
There's a first. I'm sure this will be the best episode
That's
ever.
Right. With the most hearts.
Yeah. Well, at least we have an interesting topic. I mean, I think we do a lot of federal income tax planning. We don't typically dip into the state a lot. We have had one podcast on state taxation and sales tax, but today we're going to be talking about domicile. So you want to tell everybody what domicile is?
Sure. And this topic does come up.
All the time.
With us being in the state of Alabama with the university local and some neighboring states that don't have state income taxation. Right. Domicile is defined by the Alabama courts is a person's true fixed home where they intend to return when they're absent. So in a lot of cases that might be somewhere they spend the majority of their year.
Right. So. And different states may have their courts may have mandated it down. That definition is pretty standard. But when you get into the ins and outs of it, you know, people move for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. And sometimes these moves are prompted by tax planning reasons. That's right. So like someone in New York, maybe it looks more advantageous to live in Alabama where the retirement's not going to be taxable and it's not as cold. Right. And we have beaches, you know, all the things. Yes. And then it's just a lower taxing rate all around. Right. So New York is going to get upset with people who don't take the proper steps to ensure that they have properly established a domicile in a new area. Mm-hmm. So when we get to talking about that, there are several states that do not have state income tax. So you're looking at Tennessee, Texas, Alaska, Florida, South Dakota,
Nevada,
and Wyoming.
Yeah.
That's it. And so sometimes people will decide, you know, that they may have other taxes that may not be as attractive as the state that they're currently in, but certainly they're looking to plan for the future. They may decide that might be an area that that's where they want to concentrate.
Well, and in our environment where people can work from home, they can work from anywhere.
Absolutely.
That might be a motivation, or they may be nearing retirement and making plans for where they want to spend those years.
Or they may just get a job in one of those states.
That's right.
And they still have family in the state where they are originally from. Mm-hmm. So you've got to take certain steps. The courts it's all been kind of left up to the court systems in each state, but they all are kind of similar in that you need to take proper steps to ensure that you have established a new domicile. And I think it's important to say that in order to establish a new domicile, you have to completely abandon your old domicile.
Right.
That certainly means that you can't go back and visit family, but you have to, your actions need to show your intent, and your intent needs to be to establish a new home in a new state. And so if you get audited by the state that you left, they're going to want to see that you've done some things to prove your intent.
That's right.
Like
it's getting your driver's license in the new state where
right.
you move. Even if you maintain your home in the old state, you need to make sure you move your homestead exemption.
That's right.
They say set up a bank account in the new state.
Register to vote.
Right. Register your vehicles there.
Right. Have church affiliations or civic affiliations in that state.
Right.
Look
like you're there to to be a resident.
Yes.
Not a vacationer.
You know, and I have seen people, a lot of folks in Alabama may have a condominium that's in Florida, and they'll try to, still keep their resident here in Alabama. I shouldn't say residence. When I say that type of residence, I'm saying their home.
Right.
They'll still try to keep their original home in Alabama, but then they want to establish their new domicile in Florida without actually ever leaving the state of Alabama. And I have seen several. And if you, I know this sounds like a lot of fun for people, but if you research court cases in Alabama with the Alabama Tax Tribunal or the previous administrative law judge, you'll see that there's tons of cases where people in North Alabama have tried to say that they have established a new domicile in Tennessee, or people in South Alabama will try to say they've established a new domicile in Florida, when really all they've done is bought a condo and go there on the weekends.
Right.
Yeah.
And
they're
they're still voting in their prior location. Their tags are still in Alabama.
They're still going to church every Sunday, and they're at their church, or every Wednesday or whatever. Their kids are here, and they're going to school.
Right.
Maybe at the university, or maybe they're going to school at a public school in Alabama. I've seen people, but what's important is you've got to actually abandon that. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't own a home in Alabama and really establish a new domicile in Florida, but it doesn't need to be the main place. And I think Alabama even says that you not stay more than 7 months in your original place of residence.
Right. And I know New York was the example you used earlier, and I've seen on their tax returns, you actually have to put in a number of days that you're in New York versus
the
your
other state. Yeah.
Be it Alabama or whatever.
Yeah. And so I think we've kind of gone over the things that show intent. And all of these items that show intent were named in court cases by the judge as to these are the steps that you should have done to establish that new domicile. Let's talk about moving too, because I've seen, and I know I've been guilty of this in the past, but you'll ask a client, they'll come in and they say, hey, I moved to Florida this year, or I've moved to Tennessee, or I've moved to Mississippi, even a state that's taxing them. And you'll say, when did you move? And they'll say, well, just put 1/1. I moved at the beginning of the year. I went through a move this year, and I can tell you on New Year's Day, I was not moving anywhere.
Right. It's likely not the case.
Right. And so you really need to keep good records of the date that you moved, the actual date that you moved. Keep your moving receipts. Keep a log just to be able to prove, it's not real feasible that you moved on 1/1 if you had to make 8 more trips back to Alabama to get your stuff to move.
Right. Well, and if in that case, if you moved on 1/1/24 in your example, well, then you just stop filing an Alabama return altogether. That's going to raise a flag.
Yeah.
You need to file a 2024 tax return
as a non-resident,
right,
or part-year resident,
and show the part-year date.
And you shouldn't, it would be possible in today's remote environment that your wages are still Alabama wages.
That's right.
While you're remote working, and I think that I would be very careful with that too. If you're a remote worker and your employer is in Alabama and you decide that you're going to go work in Texas and live in Texas, you need to keep records of how many times you're having to come back to Alabama to meet with your employer.
That's true. Yes.
And you definitely would need to show that your intent is not to come back to the state of Alabama, that your intent is to be an active Texas resident.
Right.
Let's see. I had an example that we had in one of our newsletters that's on our blog at www.jmf.com. And so let's talk about this, because these things can get really messy, and because it's life, and life is complicated. And so I think you need to make sure, we as professionals need to make sure that we're asking our clients all the applicable information that we need to document. But let's get into something that kind of is like a life example. This one is Thomas got a new job on February 1st, and his wife decided that their daughter is going to remain in Alabama to finish college. And his school, it just says school. Yeah. Thomas's wife was not employed outside of the home. And Thomas visited every weekend, February through May 31st. So he was at his new job in a new state but then he came back every weekend. And he and his wife tried to sell their house in Alabama, and they didn't have much luck. And boy, do I know how that is. But anyway, they decided that he would come home and stay during the week of July to make home repairs. And then when he came home and made those home repairs, they just decided that they would keep things the way they were, and that they were going to remain in Alabama, and he was just going to, move to Florida. Yeah, and he was going to come home every weekend. And then he rented an apartment there, and he meant to get a new driver's license, but he just never did, and he didn't open a bank account there. But when he came to get his income tax return, he wanted to claim Florida residency.
Sure he did.
So, I mean, you can see the issues there. I could see that being absolutely something that would happen in life.
Oh, sure.
But Thomas is not a Florida resident.
No.
Because he didn't do the things he needed to do. And his ties were still here. His family was still here.
Right.
He, even if his family remained there, it would seem to me that he would need to get a permanent residence in Florida. He would have to have a long-term lease. And they would actually have to go visit him sometimes.
Right,
I mean, why is poor Thomas having to drive back every weekend?
Yeah. Let them travel to Florida at least half the time, right?
Yeah, some of the time.
Absolutely.
And I also wanted to mention, I had another one that I read in a case where the person had a family home in Alabama, like an old family home, and they were going to use it like for family gatherings and such. But one of the auditors asked the question, well, where are your valuables kept?
Interesting.
And they were all in that house, and there were other things that showed, they were kind of like Thomas. They didn't. But all of their valuables, all of their clothing and everything was still in that house. So it's just
that showed that they really considered it home base.
Right.
Still. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I can see, I mean, in the case of someone who kept the home or the house in Alabama and decided to rent it out or something.
yeah.
Then you've got some passive activity in Alabama. You still better be filing a return.
Right.
But take all those other steps to maintain or to establish residence in another state.
Well, I think we've covered just about it. Oh, one more thing. Let's talk about military people for a second.
yeah.
Because they're kind of unusual in that when you go into the military, you have to declare a home of record. And let's say that you enlist in Alabama, you declare Alabama as your home of record, but they station you in Texas. Your home of record is still Alabama. Yeah. So I would recommend for anyone that's coming out of the military, a little before they get out, or at least when they retire, they need to reestablish their home of record. Because the first thing an auditor is going to ask is, oh, you're military, what's your home of record?
Right. Good point.
Yeah.
Well, and then, tax filings, if you were, in their case, still an Alabama resident but had some income outside of the state, Alabama does give a credit for taxes paid in those other states. But yes.
It would only be a penalty if the other state's income tax was lower than Alabama's.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Which happens.
Yeah. In Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I think that's all. I think we've probably covered all the basics of domicile. Do you know of anything else?
No, I think we did cover.
I think we have everything there. That's all there is to say.
All right.
Well, we appreciate everyone listening to our episode, and don't forget to like and follow us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, and give us a 5-star rating.
That's right. Join us again. All right.
If you would like us to help your business or would like to suggest additional podcast topics, simply send an email to info@jmf.com.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and your favorite audio podcast apps.